Hey drummers community, welcome to this week's episode of Ask a Teacher. I've got quite the question for Carlos this week. I cannot wait to see how he answers this one. What is the difference between a polyrhythm and a polymeter?
Hey Tyler, thanks for the great question. What is the difference between a polyrhythm and a polymeter? So let's get into that in just a second. But before we do, as everybody should plainly know by now, Tyler and I are working very hard together to bring a lot of great content to you guys. Please go over to the Drummers Community website, so drummerscommunity.com. Sign up for the newsletter if you haven't already. Some of you are watching this video from the newsletter. Thank you very much. Feel free to spread the word to your drumming friends. We've got a lot of great stuff that we're trying to put together for you guys besides these videos. A lot of good content that Tyler and I are working on behind the scenes. So please keep an eye on the newsletter. Please keep an eye on the Facebook page. And as always, because you guys are Drummers Community members, I am giving you 2 free drum lessons. So it's a full hour of free lessons. Please reach out to me for that, carlspazadrums@gmail.com, or you can find more about me at carlspazadrums.com, and just let me know you came from the Drummers Community, you saw one of the Ask a Teacher segments, and you want your free lessons. So let's get into it. I love this question. Let's talk about it. Okay, so huge can of worms about asking this question, what's the difference between a polyrhythm and a polymeter? So we're actually going to make this a 2 video segment. It's going to be this week and then another video next week. So this week we're going to focus on polyrhythms. Next week we're going to focus on polymeters, but we're going to frame it through the lens of this question, what is the difference? And I'm going to explain to you why that's actually kind of a silly question. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But so today is going to be more about polyrhythms. Okay. So first things first, what does the word poly mean? Poly means more than one. So let's just start there. Poly means more than one. And a quick heads up. Sorry, I probably should have started with this. If you don't know about rhythms, measures, quarter notes, eighth notes, 16th notes, time signatures, then this is not for you. If you're not there yet, but you want to be, you want to watch this video anyways, even though you don't speak that language just yet, of course, feel free to do so. That's awesome. But I recommend, of course, that you reach out to me and get your free drum lessons, because I'll be able to gauge where exactly you are in terms of how ready you are to have this conversation. You might be more ready than you think. I might need to just kind of fill a couple gaps in your understanding, and then you'll be ready. But one way or another, it's a free hour worth of drum lessons with a professional drum instructor. You know, you might as well take it. So with that out of the way, let's get into it now. The word poly means more than one, okay? Just like the word mono means one. So one way to think about it is monotony, right? Monotony, you're just doing one thing over and over and over. That's mono, that's one. Poly means more than one. And I pulled up a nice little list here. Polygamy, more than one spouse. Polyamorous, who knows what that means? Polyphony, polymer means more than one, like material mixed in together or something like that. Polygon, right? So all of these words start with poly, which simply means more than one. So polyrhythm means more than one rhythm. Polymeter means more than one meter. Now, of course, that doesn't answer the question, what's the difference? It also doesn't answer the question, what is it? But at the very least, we can start to kind of divide our understanding of these things by just knowing the word itself. Polymeter, polyrhythm. Okay, so polyrhythm means more than one rhythm. Perfect. What's a rhythm? Love the complexity of a question like that. What is a rhythm? When it comes to drums, a rhythm is just any of the different notes. So yes, I know that the word rhythm has been co-opted into meaning kind of different things. Like, man, that song's got a great rhythm. That person who said that isn't using it the way the term is supposed to be used. Doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It just means that the word rhythm, ooh, this song's got great rhythm. That's not actually like the proper term necessarily, because in this case, especially, the word rhythm just means the different kinds of notes. So a quarter note is a rhythm, an eighth note is a rhythm, a 16th note is a rhythm. These are all the different rhythms. Okay, that's why it's considered rhythm theory when you are a drummer and not really music theory, because you're not learning about scales and all these different notes and learning about see, clearly my understanding is limited to just that. But I'm a professional with rhythm theory, the different kinds of notes, how they interact. Okay, so just think about it. You just need to know quarter notes, eighth notes, and let's say eighth note triplets. For this to really sink in, you have to know what those 3 things are, and those are the different rhythms. So already we're getting a sense of what polyrhythm could mean, more than one of those. And of course, in the grand scheme of things, there's a lot of different rhythms. We're just going to stick with those three for now. So I'm going to take it over to my screen here. This is actually the Zoom whiteboard, which I love. If you take lessons with me or you plan to, you'll be seeing a lot of this. So before we take it to a notation aspect of it, where I'm actually showing it to you in a music program that I use, MuseScore, so you're actually seeing the notes. Let's talk about it from a mathematical perspective. So I gave you a little taste of it. Let's go back a bit. The idea of a ratio, everybody should be familiar with a ratio. Let's say a ratio of 2 to 3. Okay, so 2 to 3 ratio is very straightforward, obviously. It means 2 for every 3. So, that classroom had 2 boys and 3 girls in it. So it had a ratio of 2 boys for every 3 girls, 2 to 3. So if I asked you if there's 30 girls in that classroom, how many boys are in there, you know the answer was 20. The ratio doesn't change to 20-30. The ratio is still just 2 to 3, 2 for every 3. Okay, so when it comes to a polyrhythm, you're going to see the numbers written like that. Either it's going to look like a ratio, 2-3, a 2-3 polyrhythm. Let's see if I can get this on the first try. Nice. You thought the word rhythm was hard. Try typing polyrhythm quickly. So you might see it written as 2 to 3 polyrhythm as a ratio, or you might see it almost kind of like a fraction. 2, 3. Let's do it again. Bam! 2, 3 polyrhythm. Okay. So either way, you're going to see it like this: one number over another number or next to another number. This is a 2-3 polyrhythm. Again, this still doesn't give us any information. And so we have to break it down a little bit further. So remember, I said at the beginning, poly means more than one. Rhythm are the different kinds of notes. For this, I just want you to really think about quarter notes, eighth notes, and eighth note triplets. Okay? And so now we can start to break down what a polyrhythm is, because we're going to use this idea of a ratio to understand it. So first question for you: which of those 3 notes, quarter, eighth, eighth triplet, do you think the number 2 represents? Okay, probably eighth notes, right? 1 and. There are 2 eighth notes inside of a quarter note. You can fit 2 eighth notes inside of a quarter note. So we're going to use the number 2 to represent eighth notes. So that already gives you a taste of what you're supposed to be doing when you see a polyrhythm. The first thing you need to do is try to think about what kind of rhythms you're talking about. The number 2 and the number 3 are meaningless. They're useless. It's like, numbers floating around in the air. They don't have anything solid or concrete about them because you haven't explained what kind of notes we're talking about. And that's the thing that I think that gets people automatically in the wrong direction, is they don't narrow down what these numbers are actually referencing. So the number 2, we're going to use to reference eighth notes, okay? And then the number 3 we're going to use to reference what? What does the number 3 represent? Does it represent quarter notes, eighth notes, or eighth note triplets? Which one is it? Triplets. Perfect. You nailed it. So in this scenario, the 2-3 polyrhythm is going to represent eighth notes and eighth note triplets, respectively. Okay? So let's take it to my other screen here. We're actually going to draw these out. Okay? So here's the quarter note, right? Quarter note rest, which is why I wanted to start by referencing the quarter note, one of those 3 notes that we're going to talk about. And how many eighth notes fit in a quarter note? The answer is 2. You can fit 2 eighth notes in a quarter note. 1 and, 2 and, 3 and, 4 and. All right? So here's our 2 eighth notes that you, as you already know, we're using our polyrhythm to reference. And then over here, I'm gonna put this quarter note rest here to separate these. Over here, I'm gonna draw our eighth note triplets. Okay. So here's our eighth note triplets. And again, I'm putting a quarter note rest here to really separate these notes. Here's the 2 eighth notes. Here's the 3 eighth note triplets. These are the 2 rhythms that represent the 2 numbers 2 and 3. And now that you're looking at it, it's clear as day. Of course, these 2 eighth notes represent the number 2. And of course, these 3 eighth note triplets represent the number 3. So before we've even gotten into the complexity of the polyrhythm, we're simplifying the heck out of it, and we're just talking about different kinds of notes, which you should know. And I'm even giving you a visual component here to really understand where these numbers are coming from. Okay? 2 and 3. So here's where it gets interesting. Okay? Here's where it gets interesting. So let's go back to the idea of the ratio. 2 for every 3. 2 boys for every 3 girls. What I want you to imagine is almost like, I guess in this classroom scenario, let's say this classroom can only fit 2 boys and 3 girls. You can imagine it like the boys are spread out in a way that they take up the space, and then the girls are squished a little bit closer together because they have to take up that same amount of space. So the 2 boys can kind of spread out a little bit, whereas the 3 girls have to squish together because there's more of them taking up that space. Okay, ready? Here's where it gets fun. So now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add 3 eighth notes on the bass drum, and they're going to start on the 1. So right out of the gate, you're going to play 3 eighth note triplets on the bass drum. 1 triplet, okay? And at the same time that you're going to play those 3 eighth note triplets on the bass drum, starting on the 1, you're also going to play 2 eighth notes on the snare drum, also starting on the 1. So this idea of starting on the 1 is the most important part about the whole thing. So let me draw this out here for you before I get ahead of myself. So here's our 3. Look how awkward. Immediately, even the program kind of like twitched and was like, okay, here we go. Polyrhythms, let's do it. Okay, so ignore this. I'm even going to move this out of the way. Ignore all this crap. Let's get all this out of the way, and let's just focus on this. Okay, this is what a polyrhythm actually looks like in action. 2 eighth notes being played at the same time that you're playing 3 eighth note triplets. They're starting together on the 1. I'm telling you, that is the most important part about this whole thing. Both rhythms started at the same time on the 1. Okay. Now remember, 2 is less than 3, so these 2 notes have more time to be played before they started again. There's 3 eighth note triplets, which means you have to play them a little bit faster. You should already know this about rhythms, that eighth notes are slower than eighth note triplets. Okay? There's more notes, you have to play them faster to squeeze them into that space. So you might be learning things about rhythm here too that you hadn't really connected the dots on. So notice how only these 2 notes are hitting on the 1. Only these 2 notes are hitting at the same time. That's a key feature of a polyrhythm, but we'll get into that later. Okay, so you start these 2 rhythms at the exact same time. The whole point of a polyrhythm is for these 2 rhythms to resolve at the same time. So the whole point of a polyrhythm is 2 different rhythms played at the same time, so both starting on the 1, and then they both come back together on the 2, let's say, and that's how you know that you've resolved the polyrhythm. So let me take this, copy it, and paste it here. Okay, so now we've covered half of a measure here. Again, let's just focus on this. These 2 notes are hitting at the exact same time. These are not. This is not hitting with anything. And then you're starting again. Okay, so here the polyrhythm has restarted. It took 2 eighth notes or 3 eighth note triplets before the polyrhythm could resolve and start again. So no matter what, if I copy paste this, if I keep copy pasting this, it's not going to matter. It's going to continue looking the same way. Okay, so now let's go all the way back to the beginning. What is a polyrhythm? A polyrhythm is 2 rhythms played simultaneously, meaning they both start together at the same time. And the most important thing about that is to think about what kinds of notes those numbers are representing. So if somebody says, do you know how to play a 2-3 polyrhythm? The first thing you have to ask yourself is, okay, which note does the 2 represent? Eighth notes. Which note does the 3 represent? Eighth note triplets. And then you're saying, can I play eighth notes and eighth note triplets simultaneously? And whether you can or you can't is irrelevant, but now you're aware of the question. You're aware of what the person is asking you to do. Can you play a 2-3 polyrhythm? Why, yes, I can. I can play 2 eighth notes and 2 eighth note triplets simultaneously. And visually, this is what it looks like. Here's what a 2-3 polyrhythm sounds like, and I'm going to play it exactly as it's shown here. Okay, that's what it sounds like. Let's talk about it. 1 and. Oh, I saw a video where the guy was trying to do this, but he wasn't telling you which instrument he was referencing specifically, so it was kind of useless. So I'm not gonna make the mistake that he made. If you see it highlighted blue, that's the instrument that I'm saying out loud. Right now, I'm going to play what you see here, but I'm specifically going to count the eighth notes on top. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, right? So you heard me counting eighth notes. Those eighth notes were lining up with the snare notes, and those are visualized right here. Now I'm going to do it with the eighth note triplet, okay? So this is highlighted green. You're going to hear me counting eighth note triplets, but I'm going to play the entire polyrhythm. 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet. Okay? So, this is not a lesson on playing the 2/3 polyrhythm. Maybe I'll put some of those videos out at some point. You know, I don't want to go too long here, and this is complicated stuff, but essentially, it actually even visually looks the way that it sounds. These two notes are hitting at the same time. Then it's a bass note and then a snare note immediately, and then another bass note. Both bass, snare, bass. That's how I've explained it to students before. Both bass, snare, bass. Both bass, snare, bass. Now I'm getting into teaching the 2/3 polyrhythm, even though I said I wasn't going to. Okay, so get your free drum lessons with somebody who's, you know, this enthusiastic. You'll learn a lot and quickly. So again, in the overall context of what is the difference between a polyrhythm and a polymeter, you need to understand what a polyrhythm first is. And there's only one more thing I need to explain about polyrhythms before you've pretty much understood it. You do have to kind of sit down and play around with them a little bit and see a few examples before it really clicks. But now at least you've got a kind of a sense of it. But in the greater context, the difference between this and a polymeter, well, very obviously, because of what we said before, was that polyrhythms is more than one rhythm. A polymeter must mean more than 1 meter. And if a rhythm and a meter are two different things, obviously we know these are not the same thing. And then the question really is that you're asking is what's the difference between a rhythm and a meter? You're not asking what's the difference between a polyrhythm and a polymeter because the poly part is irrelevant. Really what you're asking is what's the difference between a rhythm and a meter. So I will answer that, you know, in a basic sense here, but in the next video, that's when I'm going to tie a big red bow on it and make it even more clear. So rhythms are the different kinds of notes. Meters are the different places where you put the notes. So even better than the word meter is I like the word measure, polymeasure, and the difference between the rhythms and the measures. The rhythms are the different types of notes, and the measures are the place where you put the notes. Okay, so it doesn't matter what kinds of notes you're putting in a measure. You can do whatever you want. You can put whatever kinds of notes you want in a measure. So the difference between a rhythm is in a measure. What a weird question. The rhythms are the types of notes. The measure is the place where you put the notes. That's like saying, what's the difference between the car and the garage? Why are you even asking me? A car is a whole separate thing. A garage is a place where you could put a car if you wanted to, or you don't put your car in your garage, right? It's kind of a weird question. Those two things, even though they kind of relate, it's like, dude, they don't have anything to do with each other necessarily. I don't keep my car in my garage, you know? Okay. So the last thing that I wanted to mention about polyrhythms is that it would be a very logical question for somebody to ask, oh, okay, so he said that polyrhythm is more than one rhythm played simultaneously, starting together on the one, so that must apply to all rhythms, right? So that's actually not the case, even though that is a very logical question. So to answer that, let's go back to our fractions, okay? The fraction 2/3 is the lowest possible version of that fraction, right? So if you saw 4/6, if you were in a math class and you saw 4/6, the teacher would say, oh, you can reduce that even more, and you would reduce that to 2/3. 2/3 is the most reduced version of that fraction, okay? So the same way that 2/3 is the lowest possible version of that fraction, if you said, what about eighth notes? What about eighth notes and 16th notes, meaning that the number 4 is representing 16th notes in this rhythm, would this be considered a polyrhythm, 2/4? And the answer is no, and it's because they are divisible. So I don't want to lose you here. You got to work with me on this. The reason this is not considered a polyrhythm is because the 2/4 fraction, for example, could be reduced to 1/2. Okay, so you're not getting the polyrhythm that you were looking for by referencing 2/4 because it can be reduced. So if you'd like me to boil all that down to a much easier non-mathematical way of thinking about it, I can't. So learn your math. But what I will say is that no two rhythms that consistently meet each other, so quarter notes and eighth notes, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and they're constantly meeting up with each other, okay? Those do not count as polyrhythms. Polyrhythms are only two rhythms that are non-divisible. So 2 and 3. You can't divide that fraction. That's why it's good to think about it like fractions. You can't bring that fraction any lower down. Think of any two numbers under 10 that are non-divisible. 4 and 5. Can't reduce that anymore, right? 4 and 8, that one doesn't count because you can reduce that even more. 2 and 4, and then 1 and 2. Okay, so it can only be two numbers that are non-divisible. 8 and 9. Okay, 8/9. That's a polyrhythm. Again, 4/5. 4/6. Check this out. 4/6 is non-divisible. You can't fit 4 evenly into 6, but it can be reduced. What can it be reduced to? What is 4? Can you tell I friggin' love this stuff, man? What can 4/6, wow, 4/6 be reduced to? It can be reduced to 2/3, right? Which means that physically playing the 2/3 polyrhythm, which I did before, physically feels exactly the same as playing a 4/6 polyrhythm. Okay, so if I've lost you here, it's because you haven't yet thought about what kind of note the 4 represents, and you haven't yet thought about what kind of note the 6 represents. If you think about those things, you will understand what I'm talking about. Okay, a 4/6 polyrhythm, the 4 is 16th notes, right? 1 E and A, best way to think about it. And the 6 is 16th note triplets because you can fit 6 16th note triplets inside of a quarter note. Okay, so the 4/6 polyrhythm actually feels the same because it's what you're doing as the 2/3 polyrhythm. Now, God, I love this stuff. Let's go to my other screen here. Can't stop. Can't stop once you've started. It stings. So here's our 2/3 polyrhythm, eighth notes versus eighth note triplets. Now what happens when I do the same thing, but instead of using the 2 to represent eighth notes, I'm going to use the number 4 to represent 16th notes. Okay, if you know your rhythms already, you know where I'm going with this. It's going to be twice as fast, but let's actually play this out. Let's make this happen here. So now, forget about all this stuff. Let's zoom in. So again, they're both starting together on the 1, right? That's really the main tell of a polyrhythm. Both rhythms are starting exactly at the same time, and now you're playing through these. Now, it's exactly the same. Look at the relationship between these 2 notes and these 3 notes before it starts again. These 2 are hitting at the same time. Okay? So one way to think about it is that there is no such thing as a 4/6 polyrhythm. There is no such thing as a 4/6 polyrhythm. It's just a 2/3 polyrhythm that's been put into 2 different kinds of notes, 16th notes and 16th note triplets. In reality, physically, you are not playing a different combination of rhythms. You are playing a 2/3 polyrhythm, 2 for every 3 before it restarts. You're just playing it using different notes, 2 for every 3 before it restarts. Okay? Now, again, if you know your rhythms, if you don't, take your free lesson with me, but if you know your rhythms, you already know what this sounds like. And I'm going to play it for you right now. So I can't play this and play through it here at the same time. Let me just show you. This is just for fun now. You should just be enjoying this at this point. So I've got to play this first measure noticeably slower because I'm going to have to double the tempo here. To go from eighth notes to 16th notes is to double the tempo. And to go from eighth note triplets to 16th notes triplets is to double the tempo. Okay, so real slow. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Aha. Okay, so again, not easy to count it while you're playing it. But as you saw, I flashed in front of the screen so you could kind of see it. I was playing on the snare. I was going from 8th notes on the snare to 16th notes on the snare. Physically, what I was doing, I was still playing a 2/3 polyrhythm. Ba, ba, ba. Okay? 2 for every 3. But I was doubling the tempo so that the types of notes I was using were different. Okay? So again, man, please, I could do this all day. Please make me stop. We've gone for way too long. And this is only the first half. The second half, the next video comes out next week where we talk about polyrhythms. If you missed anything in there, reach out to me, carlosplazadrums@gmail.com. If you're a Drummers Community member, you get a full free hour. That's 2 free drum lessons if you consider a drum lesson to be 30 minutes. And if you're not a member of the Drummers Community, please join it. Go to drummerscommunity.com, join the newsletter. The other thing I will say is please subscribe to this channel, hit the notification bell. I want everybody, continuing to keep up with this. We've got a lot of cool announcements coming up. We've got a lot of great videos coming out. And sometimes on the Facebook page, even though it's great, there's 100,000 people on there talking to each other, you might miss some of this stuff. So subscribe to that newsletter, subscribe to this YouTube channel. Stay, abreast of everything that we're doing. And again, any questions, please reach out. Let's leave it at that. I'm going to go drink some water. Take care, guys.
Thank you so much for joining us for this week's episode of Ask a Teacher. We have some big things coming up soon in the drummers community, and we cannot wait to share those with you. So if you want to stay up to date on everything that's going on with our community, please join our email newsletter. That is the best way to keep up with everything we're doing. You should find the link down below this video to join the newsletter right now. Of course, it's totally free to do so. And if you liked this video, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and ring that bell to make sure you never miss any more of these. Thank you so much for being a part of this.